I would never say a boxer is going to be an MMA guy or an MMA guy is going to be the boxer. It depends on the individual.
Hey guys, welcome back to the show. We're focusing on the BKFC 6-card Malignaggi versus Lobov, Saturday, June 22nd in Tampa, Florida, live and only on pay-per-view. Tonight we got two guys from the broadcast team, no introduction needed, Mr. Chris Lytle, and on the phone we have Mr. Sean Wheelock. How's it going, gentlemen?
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm excited. Man, I actually get to be close and watch these fights and instead of watching it on TV. I'm like a kid in a candy store. Just can't wait to see these two guys fight. Actually, the whole card, I can't wait for all of it.
And Chris, we get to be paid to be there, and no one's going to punch us in the head, at least not that we know of going in.
That's what I keep telling people, nobody's going to hit me this time, People don't understand. Are you fighting again? I'm like, why would I do that when I can get paid and not get hit, I can tell people how much that probably hurt, from my experience.
There you go. Well, gentlemen, you guys are no stranger to any of it. Wheelock, you've called boxing, MMA, bare knuckle. Chris, you've done boxing, MMA, bare knuckle. So it's like you guys are perfect, for really, I guess the theme of this, and Chris, we touched on it a few minutes earlier, the whole theme of this seems to be the whole MMA versus boxing theme. I guess really, man, and with the main event, especially with Artem Lobov coming from the UFC world, Paulie Malignaggi, obviously, his boxing pedigree speaks for itself. I think trying to call the fight, I've seen people say, well, Paulie's going to crush Artem because he's the pure boxing champion. I've heard people say, well, Artem's going to crush Paulie because of the whole, the plump clinch and everything else. I just don't think it's as simple as that. I guess, Chris, I want to start with you, man. I guess just from the MMA versus boxing aspect, what exactly are the non-obvious differences?
Sure. No, and that's a funny thing. I've heard really intelligent people who've been around these sports forever, and they can't agree on it. So it's not that it's very difficult. And I would never say a boxer is going to be an MMA guy or an MMA guy is going to be the boxer. It depends on the individual. So, you have certain. Even this fight right here is intriguing. Paulie obviously is going to be a cleaner boxer, but this isn't boxing. This isn't MMA. This is something different. So what's going to happen when, Paulie's, moving and throwing good punches and Lobov grabs his head and starts throwing uppercuts? We don't know. Yep. That's why it's going to be an intriguing fight. I don't think it's going to be as easy as people think for Paulie to stick and move and to stay away. I think Lobov's tough. If you have a tough-minded individual like Lobov who can eat some punches, I think it could be an interesting fight. But it's not just this fight. It's not even just boxing versus MMA. It's only like you have Tom Show versus Julian Lane. That's the same stylistic wise fight right there. Yeah. You got more of a stand-up boxer versus more of a brawler. So I think we see that overall theme here through and throughout on this card, and it's kind of like who's going to win. I don't think the same guy is going to win each time. I think maybe one of the brawlers is going to win. Maybe one of the boxers is going to win. Which is it going to be? That's very difficult to tell, but it's a very interesting dynamic that's going on here. And if anybody says this guy's going to kill the other one, that's a good guess, but you can flip a coin. I think you're wrong. You don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, Wheelock, I guess kind of the same thing, man. From your angle, you've seen it all. What are the biggest differences between MMA and bare knuckle?
It really comes down to, I think, the inside game. And, Chris Lytle is one of the very few combat sports athletes who had tremendous success in both MMA and boxing. But it doesn't translate. If you go back to UFC 1 with Art Jemerson, who is top 10 in the world at 190 pounds at cruiserweight, and later that fall of 1993, although the bout got canceled, was scheduled to box Tommy Hitman Hearns, and he never threw a punch nor landed a punch against Royce Gracie. Marcus Davis was a pretty good boxer. Chris, you're probably actually the most successful boxer ever in MMA. And obviously the great run you had in the UFC, but you know how difficult it is to translate the sports. I really look at bare knuckle, and as we've been evolving, the first show was June 2nd of last year in Cheyenne, Wyoming, that this sport is the exact midpoint between boxing, gloved boxing, Marcus of Queensberry rules, and MMA. The boxers have the advantage in space with combinations, with volume. The MMA fighters have the advantage on the inside because When Chris is training his striking in an MMA gym in Indianapolis, no one's calling break when he's working an underhook and digging in an overhook or a whizzer or holding a plum or a half-tie plum or a waist cinch. He's still throwing, and they're throwing in that clinch. In a boxing gym, they're saying break and separate. In bare knuckle through the 1700s and the 1800s, the clinch game was a big part of it. Some rule sets even allowed throws. As boxing evolved with glove boxing and the Marquess of Queensberry rules in the 20th century, all of that disappeared. So when I look at Lobov Malignaggi or any world-class boxer against a world-class MMA fighter, it comes down to space, time, distance for me. The boxer needs to have the distance to land the cleaner, tighter, more effective punches, which they're going to do by definition. The MMA fighter needs to take away the space. They need to work the clinch. They need to land those short, effective strikes and sit chest-to-chest standing on their opponent.
Hey, go ahead, Chris.
100% accurate what he was saying. I couldn't agree with that more.
What do you think about how important is dirty boxing and clinch work that you just don't see in traditional boxing? How important is that to really from a boxer to transition to be able to learn that and be successful in bare knuckle?
Well, I mean, I think that you also have to look into here that there's several types of boxers. You have the guys who are long and lanky and try and stay on the outside. You guys who try to be fast. You got guys who are one-punch knockout power. You have Julio Cesar Chavez who try and get inside and just do dirty, nasty, ugly fighting. Yeah. So it kind of depends on a lot of that. Some of those guys who like a Julio Cesar Chavez, they might already be good at that type of fighting. So it depends on what type of boxer we have here is going to kind of, decide on how important that is to him. If you have a guy who stays on the outside and throws jabs, he's not going to be real good at inside fighting typically. So this could be a rude awakening for him. So it matters a lot of what your style is. Like for me, my style in boxing never really translated over to MMA at all. I was more of an inside grinder. You can't do that with MMA. When you can grab and hold and take down all that stuff, it changes. And the same thing happens here. If you're throwing inside punches, it's difficult to land those when the guy can grab your head, pull you in, and start throwing uppercuts. I think Chris Lieben showed that the last fight. He grabbed the guy, hit him about 5 times, and the fight was over.
Wheelock, I guess let's. I know you guys can't make official predictions. You're part of the broadcasting, so I won't ask you to do that. But what do you think the key points are for Paulie to win the fight, and a key point for Artem to win the fight?
So I went back and I watched the Lobov Knight fight, and I actually had not watched that since we were commentating that live. And I do the Roy Jones Jr. boxing series on Fight Pass, and James Smitty Smith, my color commentator, and Thomas Triber, the ring announcer, they were very interested in seeing the fight. So I pulled it off of MMA Core and we watched it. What I noticed in that fight, I was aware of it calling it live, but it's different when you watch it, especially with a couple of months hindsight, is how much more Lobov was willing to fight in space against Jason Knight, who we believed that he was a superior striker than, fairly or unfairly, than he is going to do against Malignaggi. I think this is going to be the inside clinch work game. I won't make a prediction, but I will tell you that this fight's going to come down to space. That if Malignaggi can find the space, and he was never a huge puncher, even at his absolute world championship best, he was never a huge puncher, but he was a really smart, effective, precise volume puncher. He's got to be able to do that against Artem Lobov. Lobov has to make this a grind. He has to take it to the inside. He has to land those powerful shots. And look at how well Beck Rawlings has done fighting 2 fighters out of the box. Alma Garcia, no MMA, straight boxing, and then Britton Hart, again, straight boxing, no MMA. Right. Beck Rawlings was able to go against what you would think technically would be superior strikers and negate their boxing, that perceived striking advantage, because she was throwing a lot of uppercuts to the body from the half plum. She was working to the inside, in and out effectively, limiting space. That's what I see. Again, Lobov clearly wants an inside fight. Malignaggi wants the outside fight in range. And it's early on, if you think, and Chris, you fought in bare knuckle in England, although it's a little different because you are wearing limited hand wraps over the knuckles. But since the rebirth of bare knuckle in the United States with BKFC 1 last June 2nd, MMA fighters have had the advantage over boxers. Now, it's easy to say, look, in MMA, you've had some huge stars. You've had Chris Lytle, you've had Chris Lieben, you've had Joe Riggs, you've had Rico Rodriguez. We've not seen that level of boxer until now with this card. Malignaggi, don't forget Randall Bailey, a former world champion in boxing. So the boxers, for whatever reason, have been a little slower to come to bare knuckle than the MMA fighters. This is really the first test where we're seeing somebody who was a world champion in boxing against somebody who fought at the highest level in MMA, Artem Lobov in the UFC.
100%. Chris, if you were part of Malignaggi's training camp, his coach, or what have you, if you were involved with him, what would you be telling him to do in order to get ready for this fight?
Well, the main thing is he's got to start really working on getting away from boxing gloves. I can't tell you the first time, I do an MMA even with littler gloves. The first time I had a bare knuckle fight, I felt naked out there. That's the only way I can describe it. Is I went out there and I was like, oh man, this guy's trying to take my head off with no gloves on. If I try and dodge this and counter with a punch and I miss, I'm in big trouble. So you just don't feel quite right out there. You have to train a lot with no gloves. I mean, you can't really train like that and take punches. So you just have to work on, minimum gloves, trying to make it small. Because I can block a lot of punches, parry a lot of punches, do a lot of things with boxing gloves. I love boxing. I like to do a lot of rounds of sparring, and I'm very good at not getting hit. It's different with no gloves. So as his trainers, all I'm working on is, seeing things different. You cannot do what you've been trained to do for the last 20 years at the same effective rate. You have to change it up, and you have to see something coming from different angles. It's not going to be as clean. It's just going to be a different fight. So just trying to throw some MMA-type guys on there with littler gloves, not going super hard because you don't want to get cut open, but you have to see those different angles, and you have to know you can't do the same things in boxing that you could do in bare-knuckle boxing.
Speaking of that, Paulie, he's not, I don't want to say a slow starter, but he usually doesn't start picking up till about the third, fourth, and fifth rounds. Training the same way and fighting the same way for years, how hard of a habit is that to break, and can you break that habit in a span of, however long it's been since they announced this fight, 3 months, 4 months? How hard is it to break that habit?
That's going to be very difficult to break. I mean, I would expect he's going to try and come out there and feel it out a little bit, but I think he knows he has to start faster. There's only 5 rounds and only 2 minutes. He's not going to have time. But his game plan is going to have to be, obviously, to stick and move. So he's going to try and come out, and he's going to try and, hit low ball with some hard shots right away, I would think. But he's definitely not going to try and stand and bang. I think he's going to try and hit and move. As a guy who's a slow starter, that's definitely a hard thing to get used to, and it might throw him off a little bit trying to come out and go a little faster. But I think he has to realize that if he waits through the third round this time at 2 minutes at the same rate, the fight's almost over. You really can't do that. So it could be a very interesting dynamic when he's not used to that. I mean, it's very difficult to change, especially somebody who's been doing this for 20 plus years. Just to go out and change the way you do things. It sounds easy. Oh, I'll just change it up. Not so easy. Not nearly as easy as it sounds to just go a little out there and be a faster starter. So, I mean, I've noticed myself, I don't even feel good when I'm sparring now to about the third round. That's just because I'm getting older, and it just takes a little longer for everything to get moving. He better be ready to go right away when he goes out there. And it's amazing. I can spar a lot. You go out there for 5 rounds of bare knuckle, you get tired. It's amazing.
Yeah, I'll just pick up on this. So I think one of the geniuses of the rule set that Dave Feldman put in, who's the founder and the CEO of BKFC, is these 2-minute rounds. And I know just as a commentator, and I'm a guy who doesn't just commentate MMA with 5-minute rounds, I'm also commentating a monthly boxing series with 3-minute rounds. And those 2-minute rounds fly by. And as a commentator, if I'm feeling that difference, Chris, when you debuted against Drew Lipton, although he never made it out of the first round, but those 2 minutes just must have felt like a track meet. I mean, those 2 minutes feel like 20 seconds as a commentator. So when you're talking about slow start and feeling out, yeah, you're going to find yourself with a minute left in round number 4, and the fight's nearly over. I love the fact that these fights are a maximum of 5 rounds in 10 minutes. The pacing is there. Invicta, last month in my home state of Kansas, they had their one-night tournament, and the quarterfinals and the semifinals were 1 5-minute round. And those are some of the best rounds of MMA I've seen this year, and it's the exact same concept. When you do not have time to waste, you're not wasting any time, And I'm sure Malignaggi's been working on that. But, Chris, to your great point, when you're 20, 25 years as a boxer and you have that 3-minute clock, now you have to reset. And I'm sure that was tough for you with that 5-minute clock in your head in MMA. We all get used to that clock. It's funny, all of us who work in combat sports, whether you're a trainer or a fighter or a commentator or a referee or a judge, we kind of have that sense. Go to any MMA fight for the three of us, and at about the 4-minute, 50-second mark, we're like, yeah, the round's about to end. You just know it intuitively. And the 2-minute rounds just throw everything off, but in a good way, where it absolutely becomes a sprint. It's not even a 100-meter. It's like a 60-meter sprint.
Well, and I, like to more to your point, that I think that is the obvious goal. They want action. They want to see. There's not much downtime. Even when you're clinching here, which gets boring in a lot of boxing or MMA sometimes, you're still hitting here. So if you're not hitting, they're breaking you up and standing you back, or putting you right back to where you start. But, I mean, if you're hitting, that's fine. So they want action at all times. And when you have 2 minutes, you have to be action-packed because you just know you don't have time to do anything else. So you better impose your will on that guy, and you only got a few minutes to do it. So it really promotes a lot of action, and that's what makes it so exciting. That's why I love watching that part.
I got a question for you guys. I guess it's more on the back end side of the promotion. Do you think that this fight, and like I've said video after video after video, I'm a huge bare knuckle boxing fan, a huge proponent of it, and I promote it any chance I can. It's been getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and Dave Feldman has done such a great job with BKFC, and it seems like each show, it's really that much bigger than the next. With Malignaggi versus Lobov, do you think that this is the one that kind of breaks into, maybe kind of cracks that glass ceiling, so to speak?
Go ahead, Joe.
Either of you.
No, Chris, I defer to world-class fighters always.
Well, I mean, to me, I really hope so because, this is what, like you were talking about earlier, we haven't had the level of boxer that we've had of MMA guys. So a lot of people just look at this as like MMA guys who are done or can't cut it in UFC or whatever you want to call it. So I have talked to people who have that mentality. They like watching, but they're like, man, they need, some, this should really be different. People go, wow, Paulie's fighting. Oh my God, we got a true boxer. And let's see how he does. So I think this should really be something that could really spark the interest of other people to go, man, this isn't just MMA guys who are older or who can't cut it. Yeah. Because this is an awesome new sport, but it's a very, very old sport, which an aspect of it that I love and what attracted me to it. When I first saw it, I was like, I have to do this. I call myself a combative athlete, and I haven't done this. I'm not true until I do this. I have to try all aspects, so I did it, and I really enjoy it. It's not like I thought. This is like boxing on steroids. You've got to be better at everything. You've got to be better at not getting hit. You got to be better at punching. You got to be more accurate. So I think the more people can pay attention to it, they like it. And when they see it, they want to see it again. They're going to watch the next one if they watch this one. So hopefully this can draw enough attention. You go, oh, my God, we got some pretty big-name guys in here. Let's see what happens in this one. After people watch it, they're going to go, I want to see the next one. That's what I predict is going to happen.
Yeah, you know what? I think it's in stages, honestly, and I think both of you know how close I am with UFC founder Art Davies, basically my surrogate father. And I was talking to Art earlier today, as a matter of fact, and we were talking BKFC, but then we talk every day, and we usually talk BKFC. The parallels between what Art did with the UFC and MMA 25 years ago and what Dave Feldman is doing and we're all doing with BKFC is amazing. If you look at the early days of the UFC, oh, it's a blood sport. It's a fad. Oh, this is ridiculous. These fighters are bums. Who are all these people? Oh, well, they're fighting in Wyoming. They're fighting in Mississippi. Oh, this isn't for real. Slowly and steadily, it became a mainstream sport. I mean, Chris, you think about when you were in the UFC even a decade ago, it was still kind of a fringe sport. It wasn't that uncommon in 2008, 2009, when you told people you worked in MMA and they said, what's that? And you said mixed martial arts. They said, oh, my grandson does Taekwondo. I mean, how many times have we all heard that? I mean, you think about it, 10 years ago, there were people didn't even know that our sport existed, and that's crazy. I mean, go work in football or basketball and confront people who don't know that your sport exists. And I think that learning curve is there right now still with bare knuckle. People are still figuring out, they're still learning about it. it's going to take time. So I think it happens in stages. The first stage was to do the initial show, which was, like I said, June of last year. Chris, when you came on the card, Joe Riggs, our mutual really good friend, came on the card. There was more added credibility. There was the move up. The last show with Knight and Lobov, a lot of people said that was our Griffin Bonner. And then Malignaggi and Lobov. And then what's next? It's in stages. If you look at the history of the UFC, they had an amazing first show, UFC 1, November 12th, 1993. But then it grew. UFC 4 was pretty special, and UFC Japan was great, and UFC Brazil, and then it built in the Ultimate Fighter, and it just kept building. So I think this is the next big step, and then it's what's after it. You know, Dave Feldman is a guy, a lot of people I think nationally don't know Dave Feldman. His late father, Marty, is in the Philly Boxing Hall of Fame. Dave is the son of a promoter. He was a former professional boxer. He gets it. He's been around boxing and around combat sports his whole life. He's also been an MMA promoter. So it happens in stages. But I can just tell all of you that when I'm at fights, I commentated Chael Sonnen Submission Underground on UFC Fight Pass last month. The fighters on the card, Gil Melendez, Jake Ellenberger, Craig Jones, who I think is the best grappler in the world right now, Diego Sanchez, they're all asking me about bare knuckle. When I'm commentating the Roy Jones Jr. fight, those boxers are asking me about bare knuckle. I was at a house show a couple of weeks ago in Kansas City for the commission in Kansas. Those fighters are asking me about bare knuckle. It's starting to permeate the fight culture. This fight takes us to the next level, and then we go on. And Chris, you know as well as I do, so many fighters are on the outside waiting to see who comes. And a lot more UFC veterans see people like Chris Lytle and Chris Lieben and Beck Rawlings and Joe Riggs, and they're like, well, yeah, I can do it. And now a lot of boxers are seeing people like Paulie Malignaggi and Randall Bailey and going, yeah, you know what, I can do it. And that's how the sport grows. That's how the promotion grows.
You know, I think it's going to bust through. I really do. I think it's going to bust through. I think this is a huge step, and I think it's just going to keep getting better and better. And I know a lot of promoters say this is the best card ever, this is the best show ever, and they say it every time. But this, I mean, really, you guys, you know, I went to the first card I went to live was the one in Cancun. Awesome card. The last card with Artem and Knight. Awesome card, even better. This card, even better. You know, and it just keeps the stakes keep getting upped and upped and upped and upped. But well, guys, go ahead.
No, and I'll just say to your point, you guys realize that for the early UFCs, because Art Davie could not get anyone to say yes, he actually had to take out ads in magazines like Inside Karate and Black Belt and Inside Kung Fu, saying send in your application because people were telling him no. Yeah. He could not get people. People like Dan Gable and Don the Dragon Wilson and Bart Vale and Leon Spinks were saying, this is the worst idea I've ever heard my whole life. I can't believe it. Chuck Norris was offered the role of a commentator, and he thought that the police were going to shut it down, and he turned them no. That's where our title of the book, Is This Legal, comes from. That's what Chuck Norris said to Art and Orion Gracie. Is this legal? That's what you're seeing. So with the first show, people are like, wow, is this really going to happen? And Chris, I know you weren't with us on BKFC 1 last June in Wyoming, but I'm telling you, even the week of the event, there were people questioning, is this really going to happen? Yeah. Really? This is really going to happen? And now a year later, we don't have that. So for me, 25 and a half years on from the birth of MMA with UFC 1, this is the next category of combat sports. We have not had a new combat sport since 1993. This is our new category of combat sports. And you're going to see, I think, just like MMA, you're going to see imitators, pretenders, other big promotions, small promotions. Chris, in Indiana, when it's passed, not if, but when it's passed and legalized in Indiana, you're going to see it all the way from big promotions like BKFC to little house shows. That's what we're going to see in Kansas as well. And it's going to be just another combat sport. You'll go, and maybe it's kickboxing, maybe it's bare knuckle, maybe it's MMA, maybe it's boxing, maybe it's submission grappling, but it's all there in the combat sports universe.
Well, and more to your point, what you were talking about earlier is you know, this is a new sport, and to me, it is. There's a need for it because it fills a lot of the needs that I want. I mean, I'm liking watching certain fights, but sometimes I'm like, you know, you can tell a lot of these guys are just there trying to win a decision. They're kind of, there's too much on the line. They're not sometimes not as exciting. But here, especially with 2-minute rounds, I mean, all these fights are typically pretty exciting. I mean, and plus you got that cash. Like they don't have no gloves on. This guy can hit him right. I mean, it just adds a lot to it, and I think that is an interest factor that a lot of people have because sometimes things do get stale. I mean, for a while I didn't want to watch any more boxing. I mean, there was always a handful of good fights that I wanted to see, but sometimes I'm like, I can pass Floyd Mayweather. I don't care if he's the greatest of all time. I don't want to watch the guy fight. It's not going to be a good fight, I promise. Floyd hasn't really put on any good fights. He doesn't. He's just a boring fighter. But, I mean, you don't really get that here. So I think there's a need for it, and I think people are going to be gravitating towards it. Like you said, fighters are asking about it. I get a lot of people who want to do it. I got some great boxers at the gym who kind of talk about it, but they're definitely not wanting to do it right now. They're still trying to climb and make that big money from boxing because the big money's not here yet. But as more and more people get into it, the money will come.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think that for anybody that's on the fence, if you're an MMA fan and you're kind of curious because you heard the whole Malignaggi Lobov thing, if you're a boxing fan and you're kind of curious, this is the one to sink your teeth into. This is the one to check it out. You're not going to regret it. You're going to love it. June 22nd, BKFC 6, Malignaggi versus Lobov. Guys, please, please, please do not miss this. It's going to be a hell of a show. Only on pay-per-view live in Tampa, Florida. Gentlemen, Chris Lytle, Sean Wheelock, it was an absolute pleasure. We thank you so much for joining in with us. And I'm Joshua Furs, and we'll see you next time.
The line is drawn. Malignaggi versus Lobov. Boxing versus MMA. Which will reign supreme? Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship 6. Paulie Malignaggi versus Artem Lobov. For the first time ever in the Sunshine State. With UFC legend Chris Lieben taking on Bellator star Brennan Ward. Plus the lightweight tournament final. Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship 6. The line is drawn. Saturday, June 22nd, only on pay-per-view.